So calling the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Fred.
Here.
And where are you?
Oh, I'm at my home at 435 Stewart Avenue.
Tim.
Tim Hills in Kalamazoo, my home.
Oop, everybody just shuffled around on me. Regina.
Regina Gorham in Kalamazoo at my home.
Catherine.
Catherine White at my home in Kalamazoo.
Kyle.
I'm also at my home in Kalamazoo.
Lene.
Lene Powell Wilson at home in Kalamazoo.
And I am Joshua Koenig, and I am at my home in Delton. All right. Approval of agenda. And we have no absences. So approval of agenda. Are there any additions or amendments? Pam?
No, I have no changes.
Pam?
I would like to ask the chair if he would be willing to add an item, O'Connor Fund grant opportunities.
Yes, I will add that as item C8C under old new business.
And I would like to make a partial report on designations and sites, since I have been working on one of them.
Okay, designation and sites is already on the agenda, and we will just change that to report.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other additions or amendments? Okay, motion to approve as amended.
A motion to approve as amended.
Second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Introduction of guests. We have two with us tonight. Pam, we'll start with you.
Pam O'Connor at home in Kalamazoo.
And Christina.
Hi, Christina Anderson. I'm the city planner for Kalamazoo, and I am at home in Kalamazoo.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Item 5, citizen comments on any non-agenda items or correspondence. Pam.
There are no citizen comments at this time.
Thank you.
Except for this citizen.
Right, Pam, go ahead.
I would just like to ask folks as individuals, not necessarily members of this commission, to consider supporting in the House of Representatives, Michigan's hopefully new historic preservation tax credit bill. It was voted out of the Senate and forwarded to the House last week. The House's schedule just got divided in half. They were to have 2 weeks, this week and next. This week was eliminated due to a COVID threat. That means 3 days next week to act on this pending legislation. Mm-hmm. So if you can take the time, please do.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. We'll move on to item 6. Christina Anderson, who is our city planner, has joined us tonight to talk a little bit about the downtown zoning and form-based code, specifically around Bronson Park. And I know we've been talking about this a little bit. We discussed this at last month's meeting, and asked that Christina come join us to talk a little bit, and hopefully we'll be able to come to some plan on how to deal with the Bronson Park district. So I'm going to hand it over to Christina. And I know that you and Sharon talked that you're going to talk a little bit about what form-based code is. So I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you. If the host could allow me to share my screen, I will do so.
I think that's Neil, so.
Yeah, please do.
You should be all set. Sorry about that.
No, I should have checked earlier. Thanks. Okay, so thank you very much for having me tonight. I'm going to give a presentation. Now, for some of you, you saw some of this presentation way back in June of 2018. I've added to it and expanded it, so it hopefully will not be too boring for you. I'm going to talk, I'm going to take a step back and talk about form-based codes and form-based zoning and what it means and how it's different from design guidelines or the conventional zoning that we use in other parts of the city and that many cities use exclusively. I'm going to talk about where we have form-based codes in downtown, in the city of Kalamazoo, and then we'll move into our downtown Bronson Park discussions. So with that, so what is a form-based code? Form-based code, it's a zoning tool. It is a type of tool that's meant to support predictable results from development, and by using, really considering the public realm when you are thinking about a building. So it's not just looking at the building in a vacuum, but looking at the building and the relationship of the buildings next to it, plus the relationship of that building to the street. And it prioritizes form. Now, zoning came about because we focused on uses, right? We need to have industrial over here because it's stinky. We need to have residential over here, and we need to space out our residential because we had our tenement buildings that prevented air and light getting into our buildings. We created unsafe situations, and that's really where zoning was born, out of siloing everything. Form-based codes, they regulate use, but they think about form first. It is definitely regulations and not guidelines, which often when you think about some of these elements we're going to talk about, you find them in guidelines. But in this case, they are in the code itself. So again, zoning tool prioritizes form over use. Important, takes in that relationship of buildings to each other, buildings to the street. It is used to preserve existing context. It should be tied to a vision. And it provides added specificity over conventional zoning. And that's where we get those predictable results. So the codes may look different and might feel more complicated just on first glance, but by having additional detail than traditional codes do, you get that predictability because everybody knows what's allowed. The developer knows what's allowed and the neighbors know what's allowed. And so I like these. These are just some easy examples, right? So if you just regulate use, both of these two things are fine. And both of the newer buildings would perfectly meet the code. They both are residential in use. They both appear to meet the setback, whether that was 15, 20, or 25 feet from the front property line. They both are less than whatever the height is. Fairly standard. It often ends up at 35 feet in height, which, was tied to ladder height at one point for fire departments, right? So, you didn't want to go higher than what the fire department could put out. And so, sometimes these things stick with us. Mm-hmm. But obviously, those two buildings don't they kind of stick out, right? They are, one is definitely set back further than the others. They are oriented differently on the lot, right? Length versus, perpendicular to the street versus parallel to the street. And, definitely change character. And that's when you start to think about what a form-based code is, because you want to go beyond just the use. And when you think about it in our commercial areas or our mixed use areas, it's not just building placement. These two buildings appear to be built pretty close to the front property line in these walkable areas, but they seem to be missing some elements, right? We got some transparency issues. Transparency referring to that measurement of wall to window to wall, excuse me. We also have, on the CVS location, a bit of a location issue, right? Because we did not build to the human scale. The human is right here, and the windows are clearly well above, not activating that building, and therefore creating essentially a blank wall. So when we think about form-based codes, something that we often compare them to are design guidelines. I said earlier that design guidelines are often where cities put form requirements, especially before form-based codes became a popular tool. So we've already talked a bit about form-based codes, that more certain outcome should be easier to administrate, and they should simplify the review process because it's just required. There's not a lot of variability in it. Design guidelines do leave some room for subjective interpretation, especially when they include design. And that's why there's a review committee, right? To make sure that their meeting standards and to discuss kind of a push-pull based on the project on which way those standards can go. That can make them a little harder to enforce and obviously requires oversight because there's review. And so I like to use this example. Design guidelines, can yield good results. You can get windows, you can get doors, you can get the pattern, but you often miss the bigger picture, not always, but often, which is, that where it is on the lot, that thing, some of the stuff that you get in the zoning code itself. So form-based codes compared to traditional or conventional codes. We've already talked about that certain outcome. Form-based codes prioritize form, but they absolutely include use and administration. It's just in a different place, a different prioritization. They definitely consider the relationship, the place. Again, they should be context or vision based. They really want to tie land use and streets together. And they can be dialed up or down. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute in terms of what's included in a form-based code. Conventional codes, we see that the outcome for conventional codes is not always certain. Conventional codes use tools like setbacks. I don't care where your building is as long as it's not closer to the front property line than 10 feet. You could be 100 feet if your lot allowed you to. You could be right at that 10-foot mark. That's the variability that we're talking about. Conventional codes always focus on use and administration, and they really take that siloed approach because that's what that's historically what they came from. And often we hear, zoning by Xerox, right? Those basic parameters of setbacks, we already talked about where the height came from for a lot of residential districts. They're often just picked up and pulled from other cities that have similar types of projects. And you often miss the nuances of the area. We certainly found that to be the case when we were reviewing our residential districts in town, where we had a minimum lot requirement of 66 feet in the city of Kalamazoo, where I'm sure most of you know, our lots are significantly smaller than 66 feet in most of our neighborhoods, and a common small lot size is 33 feet. But because that was kind of a common thing at the time, and what other communities used, it was kind of pulled over. So when I talk about tying land use and street, these are some of the things that I'm talking about. A great place to walk, is a nice wide sidewalk. But that alone does not make an active urban area. The buildings add that character, add that variety, and add a level of interest. If you were faced with turning right or left, and these were your options, which way would you go? I would go left, right? I would go because I have windows to look into. I have trees and on-street parking to protect me from the vehicle lanes. And that makes it more interesting to me than what exists on the right. And so in Kalamazoo, this is one of the reasons why we've started to incorporate form-based coding into our zoning code, was because we want to make sure that we are kind of merging the relationship between streets and land use to create more active, well-loved areas. This is just a sampling of, what the regulations start to look like, right? That predictable outcome. You find things like ranges. You use a tool like a build-to zone rather than a setback. So that's what this is right here. And it's often a range. It can start at the property line and go back, or it can start in the property and, be a set amount. And what that says is we want your building to be located within this area as opposed to behind, as you wish, a line. We talk about transparency. Really, we care about transparency in the zoning code if we're trying to activate areas, because we're trying to get projects at human scale. So if you think back to that CVS building, they might have had the right amount of windows, but they weren't in the right location. And so we really care about, the windows between about 2 feet and 8 feet, because that's a toddler, and very few adults are 8 feet in height. So we're covering that human range. And so that's the area that we care about. You could have all windows, but we at least, the whole facade could be windows if you so chose. What we care about is, what relates to the human scale. Height, and I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the form-based codes, we talk about height as number of stories. The city zoning code up to this point has talked about height in terms of feet. You may have a building that is 50 feet tall, and that's hard, especially when you have a mixed-use building and that first floor is taller than the floors above it. As residential, you don't get that flexibility in terms of building. So, we talk about total height, and then to make our buildings as flexible as possible on our commercial corridors and in our downtown, we do ask that the ground floor be a little bit taller. So it could be used as commercial or residential. It's very flexible, can go back and forth, which is even more critical today with our fluctuations of commercial and retail viability. And so this is what it looks like. This is certainly different than the regulations that we have in our code right now. The pages are the form-based standards are set up by lot type. This is the commerce lot type. And they're divided into four sections. So one is, building placement on a lot or building siting, and everything on this side of the page relates to the building or the driveway or the parking. Height is next, and everything is tied to a graphic. Uses, because again, form-based codes absolutely include thinking about uses. And then finally, street-facing facades, always tied down to an illustration so everyone can understand, whether you're a developer, an architect, or not. So I mentioned earlier that form-based codes can be dialed up or down based on your community. So form-based codes can do the following, but in Kalamazoo we have chosen for them not to. So the first one is to regulate a defined pattern. You will often see form-based codes following pattern books, architectural pattern books for areas. Often these are new communities, being built from scratch. Think seaside. Not always. There are some areas, obviously, in the United States with very clear defined patterns that you want to replicate over and over again. Materials, we are not going to regulate materials in the zoning code. Some codes do. This is something that the city attorney and I feel that should not be in the zoning code itself. You're starting to regulate more style than you are land use, transportation, kind of issues. You will see form-based codes that regulate roof lines or cornice lines, window rhythms. There'll be information about lintels and other details. When we started doing form-based codes in Kalamazoo back in 2018, we chose not to get into this level of depth. What our form-based code standards focus on is, creating walkable areas. It says walkable downtown, but creating walkable areas. We've used form-based codes, and I'll show you in a second, in some of our key neighborhood corridors. We want to, think about that street wall, activate blocks. In the downtown, we follow the downtown life chapter of the 2025 master plan. In other areas, the goals for this mixed use zoning, form-based zoning were tied to the neighborhood plans. And again, always tying land use and streets together. So we started back in 2018 with the illustration in the upper left corner. This is in the north side neighborhood. We did a significant rezoning in this area, moving away from traditional commercial districts and manufacturing districts, which were absolutely obsolete in this area, and moving to form-based districts in this key area, which then became the Northside Cultural Business District Authority, which is a corridor improvement authority. We now have form-based standards in and around downtown. Early Q1, we are taking an upper right corner. We've been working with the East Side neighborhood before COVID hit, restarting that process and doing some rezoning work following the East Side neighborhood plan on East Main, as well as the area around East Main and Michigan. And then we started discussions before COVID hit and have not yet restarted them and hope to early next year for Portage Street in Edison, as well as Westnedge Avenue in the Vine neighborhood. So before I talk in detail about downtown, does anybody have questions on form-based codes as a tool? Okay, I'll keep going and then feel free to ask me at any point. So downtown. Initially, downtown was one big district. It was called this Commercial Central Business District. And it regulated everything the same, you know, regardless of where you were. It was one monolithic district. We divided it into 3 separate districts so we could tailor the standards, because the mall is different than Cooley Street, which is different than Cedar Street, right? So we wanted the ability to have different regulations in different places. So we created Downtown 1. The first district was Downtown 1, and this is our urban shopping core. This is the core of downtown. This is really, you know, we're talking about storefronts, our most, you know, intense area, no surface parking lots, lots of windows, dining spaces. That is Downtown 1. And it's represented on that map in the black line that circles the darkest red area. Mm-hmm. Downtown 2 is between Downtown 1 and that dashed area around it. It kind of is the, you know, we have the donut hole in the middle. It's the area around that. This area, yes, there can be storefront buildings in this area, but we've started to open it up to include civic buildings, as well as, you know, buildings that might not have a storefront, but still have a high level of transparency, like a stoop, like you often find in residential buildings or office buildings. And, you know, we always have lots of pictures off to the side. And so Downtown 2 is a big area and recognizes that, you know, we're moving away from kind of stricter storefront only, retail only, you know, on the ground floor, and an area that is a little more mixed. And then Downtown 3 goes, again, you know, one more layer of the donut. That's meant to start to transition our downtown into our neighborhoods, both in scale and intensity. You'll start to see a much wider variety of housing types. We talk a lot about missing middle housing types. We have a lot of single family, we have some high-rise apartment buildings, we are missing everything in the middle. So things like low-rise apartments, row houses, flat buildings. And so, you know, making sure that we're incorporating those into the downtown. We're doing it elsewhere as well, but for our purposes right now, you know, using those types of housing to transition to our neighborhoods in all directions. Okay, so Bronson Park itself. Bronson Park is an area that is within the Downtown 2 zoning district, which again, I have the little map here. It's a much, it is an area that is, you know, significantly bigger than just Bronson Park. There are 3 lot types that are permitted. And so I pulled the table from the code, and I know that Sharon provided you with all a link. I wasn't sure if you guys had an opportunity to look at it, but there are 3 building types. So the commerce type is that storefront building, must have a storefront associated with it. The flex building could be developed with a storefront or a stoop. It's meant to be very multi-purpose. Could be office, could be apartments. And then the civic building, which is meant to be even more flexible still, you know, much, as long as, you know, we kind of focus on the big things, making sure that there's a front entrance. It can be further set back than our other buildings, but less transparency, you know, understanding that it could be used for a variety of different things. It could be a church. It could be, you know, a government building. It could be a hospital building. So just quick snapshot of those 3 lot types. The build to zone, depending on the type of building you do, ranges anywhere between 0 and 15 feet. That's for new buildings. So we're asking that new buildings in Downtown 2 be located anywhere between 0 and 15 feet from the front property line. The lot coverage, which is the amount of the lot that the building itself can cover, also depends on your building type. And so, you know, civic buildings at the low range are 70%, up to our more intense commerce buildings are allowed to cover all of the lot, which is not uncommon for a downtown to have that as an option. And then height, which I think is gonna, you know, the biggest point of discussion for tonight. All of Downtown 1 and 2, which is illustrated in the map, again, there to the right, have unlimited height associated with them. meaning there is no max. There is a minimum. It's a minimum of 2 stories. So previous, the central CCBD, Commercial Central Business District, had a shape like this, that blue line, and it said anything within the blue line has unlimited, no maximum height associated with it. And anything outside of it can be 2 stories taller than the nearest building. This, in practice, was a little difficult. We have areas where in downtown we had a lot of buildings torn down. So we had large areas within 200 feet where there were no buildings to give that density to. And then we had areas that were very tall, like the sky rise, where everything around it, was providing quite a bit of height. Now, that is what the zoning code said. Downtown Design Review Guidelines, which exist in downtown right now, had a further note that said the Bronson Park area, so buildings that face Bronson Park, don't qualify for unlimited height. They qualify for the 2 stories taller than the tallest building within 200 feet. And that was in the guidelines. I'm sorry, Microsoft products, they like to change your font on you because you gave them more space. So it wasn't meant to be this big. So the new standard says that there's a minimum height of 2 stories everywhere, which is similar to what we had before. And anything within that dashed line, downtown 1 and 2, would have, is an area of no maximum height. And this was something we deliberated quite a bit in the final weeks of the code approval. We, in many cases, have tied zoning standards, including height in our form-based codes, to the street types. And so, we had iterations. At one point, it was just if you fronted Michigan Avenue in the mall, did you get unlimited height? And then it expanded to say, well, gosh, we're really limiting height in a lot of places in downtown compared to what we had. So let's expand it. And then we looked at the next most intense street type, which covers a good chunk of D2, and said, what if we say all of priority streets, which again were Michigan Avenue and Kalamazoo Mall, plus all the main streets, which is pretty much most of the other streets that touch lots in downtown too. And that got us closer to what we have here. So that is where I'm going to end, because I know that this is where we want to pick up our discussion. I wanted to give you the background of, where we got, how we got here, and what the discussions were behind that. I will stop sharing my screen unless you would like me to have a map up for us to discuss on. Do you have a preference? Not right now.
Leave the map up. Yeah.
Okay. I wonder if there's, do I have one that's with less stuff on it? Maybe I'll leave this one up.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
And in your packets, the Bronson Park character study is there too. The central debate, it seems right now, is this point of unrestricted height with the Bronson Park area, and that's the big concern. Taking away from the context and the scenic landscape idea, the scenic cultural unit of Bronson Park as a whole, with this unrestricted height limit. Christina and I have met, Pam and Christina have met a few times about this as well, and many of you had requested, what are the options for this? What can we do about this? What are the possible plans? And those were sent out last month to you. So I guess right now, this is the central question of what are our options? What can we do with this? What do you all think we should do with this? So I'll open the floor for discussion with this as well. I mean, Christina, go ahead.
I just want to say one other thing, and thank you. I didn't bring it up. One of the things that we have committed, the city has committed to, is the sun angle study. to understand some of the comments that came out at the public meeting had to do with casting shadows and light in Bronson Park, which I appreciate is not necessarily the same as the character comments that you made, but I wanted to make sure we touch on this. And so we have reached out to Andrews University. We've worked with architecture students there for a variety of projects. In town, Rebecca Kick, who's the director of CPED, is an architect who graduated from there, so we have a relationship. And so we've reached out and are hoping to have the students next semester do a project there, do that project for us. If they are unable to do it, we will not, and we'll know that, pretty quickly into the next semester, then we will come up with another plan. So it's not something that gets pushed to the wayside or forgot about. We will take a different path, but it's a lovely project for, soon to be full architects to be able to do this and think about it and think about the parameters. So that whatever else we want to talk about, that is something that we absolutely think we should move.
Whoop, is everybody there? I just froze, I think.
Okay.
I think we all might have froze a little bit.
Yeah. Do I have everybody? Okay,
I
good.
hear you.
Good.
So Christina, could you, just for those of us who are a little bit less map adept, could you show us on the screen where Bronson Park is?
Of course. So this right here is Bronson Park. I wonder if here, Bronson Park, courthouse, churches, well, now vacant lot and church, vacant lot, KIA, civic, church, city hall, park club, library, Miller Canfield Law Offices, and the Comerica building. Well, I'm sorry, the Greenleaf Trust, former YMCA, and then Comerica building. So right here. I'll keep my cursor on it. I'm sorry, I should have labeled it.
No, that's all right.
When were the height changed? When was the regulations changed to unlimited height? What year did that happen?
It just happened. It
Just
happened
happened.
last month. The new
Oh.
downtown guidelines were approved, or downtown zoning codes were approved.
The downtown design review guidelines were adopted in 2005. And that was the first time that I know of that we actually specified unlimited height for new construction. And it was literally just pretty much the forecourt. It was a really very limited area. So it wasn't that big. So, but recently the new code was adopted last month, and that's,
So that expanded into District 2?
So originally, all of downtown was one giant district, and it was called CCBD. We divided it into 3 districts because we felt that the area, we could come up with 3 kind of distinct areas in downtown and wanted to be able to regulate them slightly differently. There's always a balance with zoning codes between the number of districts you have. You could have 1 million districts, which gets very complicated, or you can do, fewer districts and you try and minimize it and get, the basic of what you need and lump as much like stuff together as possible. And that's the push-pull with zoning codes. We felt that in the downtown, one giant district was definitely not serving us correctly. And but that's because of both form reasons, but also because of some of the use allowances that happened. Residential units were allowed on the ground floor of the mall. I'm not sure that's the right place for, if that is our active commercial district. We want to reserve that area for retail uses and not residential, just for example.
So questions or comments? I mean, let's go ahead and enter into discussion. Pam, and actually, Christina, would it be possible to go to stop sharing screen? Because it just occurred to me that I can't see, I can only see a few. There we go. Now I have the whole commission.
Okay, if you want me, if you need the map up again, just let me know. And if
Okay.
I shut personally, if I shut my camera off, it's just because if I start to glitch, I'll shut my camera off so I don't bring everybody else down with me.
Cool. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and enter into some discussion, because I know probably many of you have questions or comments.
I do after the commission.
Commissioners?
Hi, thank you for that, Christina. That was really interesting. So I just have just to jump right in. We're thinking, let's say worst case scenario, which of course no one wants to do, but looking at the areas directly surrounding the park, of course, I'm looking at Google Maps currently, and there's not too much, there's not too much blank space. Let's say worst case scenario, something gets demolished, or let's say like the parking lot at South and Rose gets sold and somebody wants to build a building. Worst case scenario, then somebody comes in and decides to build an extremely tall building, totally out of character and scope with the rest of the area. Is there any mechanism then at all to help to curb that?
So as the code is written right now, there is not a cap on height. The building would be regulated based on, its character at the ground level.
Right.
And because again, we are really trying to tie things to that pedestrian experience, walking around and how things feel for them. So, the ground levels, I think, would be quite in character of the area. The height, I guess it depends on where it is. Right now, and Pam did a great job of listing out height. There are buildings anywhere between, the tallest the most number of stories, I believe, is the Comerica building at 9. I think that some of the spires, I don't have Pam's document in front of me. Some of the spires, are that height or maybe a little bit taller. But yeah, I mean, the way it is written right now, it could go as tall as the lot would allow.
Sure. Okay, I just wanted to double check. I'm newer to Kalamazoo and wanted to make sure that there weren't any other existing regulations or guidelines that would supersede or affect that at all. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other agencies or support groups that have expressed concern regarding this, such as the, I'm sorry, for lack of a better term, the bird people, the arborists, the things like that?
Not to my knowledge. I believe that the comments from the public meeting centered around historic character, light and shadow casting comments.
But have those issues been addressed? Because certainly, again, I'm not an arborist or a bird person, but certainly you raise those buildings, you're going to block out the sun, you're going to kill the trees because they can't get the sunlight. Have some of those considerations been addressed?
So that's that sun angle study that I talked about as a next step for us would help determine what the tallest height would be before you start to cast shadows.
I guess my concern is you already got one building, the new one. I don't know what that is, but anyway.
The Exchange building?
Okay. And it has shadowed Bronson Park.
Oh.
Well,
it's north of it. So in the
yes,
the south, the east, and the west. So it has shadowed the Radisson, but it really hasn't shadowed Bronson Park, except I can't think of any time it would. The sun just doesn't get to that angle.
Well, but we're not just talking about the sun, because we're also talking about the wind and things like that. And so it's blocked it. to some degree, albeit not totally. But if you start adding buildings, and again, what do I know? I don't know anything about buildings. And thank you very much for enlightening me, because I had no clue. But anyway, you start building buildings around it, I guess. Seems to me some of that, and I see you said that you're looking into the sun aspect of it, but some of that study need to be done, because certainly there are people who go to the Bronson Park and they want to look at the birds and the trees, and you're not going to have any if you keep building. That's just my thought. That's my thought.
Well, and my concern is, the two ideas of the landscapes, the historic and cultural landscape, and then also the scenic landscape. And at one level, those are two different creatures. And I think that form-based code has a way to work with both of these ideas, especially in terms of style guidelines and things like that. We can continue to preserve the historic and cultural landscape aspects, but the scenic landscape, that one gets a little bit more difficult at one level, especially when we're talking about height. So, and I do agree. I mean, if a lot gets sold and built upon quite rapidly before something's in place, we could lose both of those ideas theoretically. So. Anyone else before? I know Pam had her hand up.
You mentioned the exchange. Go ahead. Somebody else has started.
You go ahead, Fred.
Okay. You mentioned the exchange building shades the Radisson and the north side of West Main. Have those businesses complained? Probably they never have formally complained about that.
Mm-mm. No, and I think to some extent, and you can argue where you draw the line, I think to some extent it's expected to have tall buildings in downtown. And so I think that, you could make arguments about where you push and pull that unlimited height. But if there was going to be a place in Kalamazoo with very tall buildings, it would be in downtown. It's, where we would want our densest development. There's shared parking. There's lots of businesses to help to service the residents that might live there. It's the economic and commercial hub. And so you would expect height in downtown. Sharon, I was not here when the exchange went through site plan. I don't think it went through any zoning review because it met all the requirements for the central business district at the time, which was, there was not a height limit on that building.
Right.
I don't know if it certainly was, I know there are discussions of its height because it would be the tallest, but I'm not sure that there were, how big of an issue that was.
Well, the only thing that came up was the DDRC guidelines. And of course, that's in the unlimited height area. So there was really it met the guidelines, met the standards and guidelines without any effort. The committee, of course, commented on the design, but not on the height.
Right. And there are some things that with the new code, again, slightly off track, that would not be allowed today for the exchange place that happened. Things like the driveway on Michigan Avenue for their parking would not be allowed further because, again, we're really trying to think about driveway placement to not have interruptions in the street wall, not having interruptions for pedestrians. So there's a couple of other little things that, if it was being brought forth today, would have to be adjusted.
Before the shade study gets completed this next year, or if it's done, is there anything preventing or holding a development of an exchange type building? Of course, I can't see it going in where the city hall is, the south side of the park. I couldn't see where they could put the Civic and the city hall. I wouldn't see that a tall skyscraper would go in over there. That would be obviously where the shade problem would affect Bronson. But is there anything preventing a developer from saying, oh, I can get this piece of land and go as high as I want to go?
Not currently. Now, we do have some options, and I think, Josh mentioned that they were provided to you. One is doing the sun angle studies, so we could make some changes in the code if that was of interest. You could use the design guideline standards. Now, we are in the process of thinning the downtown design guideline standards because a lot of what was in there went from guideline to be put in the code itself. Things like the transparency and the entrance and building placement. And so we are in the process of editing that document so there's not repeat, but that document will still have some life for about another year or so because it includes streetscape requirements. We just sent an RFP out yesterday to get a new street design manual. So that will then take the place of what's in the downtown design review guidelines. I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry. We could leave something in downtown design review that talked about it, but again, that would be guideline, not code. So, the committee could always, you review guidelines with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? Because there could be some fantastic trade-off associated with a taller building for a project. That is one option. Not fast, but renewing the discussion about the historic district, local historic district around the area. Would put in height, would have an impact on height regulation. And there's a couple of other tools that we could talk about. I know Josh was exploring one that is used at the federal level. None of these things are instantaneous, right? So they all would need to be explored and figured out how to be implemented. But, those would be the routes to take. If additional regulation, if you wanted to think about height in a different way in this area.
Sharon, when you and I were talking the other day, what was the possibility that you were talking about?
We're talking about, say that again.
When you and I had our phone meeting the other day, what was the alternative solution that you had brought up?
We were talking about the conservation district.
Yes.
As a possibility.
Yeah.
Our conservation district, it's already part of the zoning code. And it is one way to characterize it, perhaps a little bit too flippantly, is historic district light. It tends to deal with demolition, new construction, not necessarily the design of the buildings as much as it's one way to prevent demolitions. It's a way to prevent ripping a porch off a house or putting addition on the front of a building, that kind of thing. So it's design review, but it's not as stringent as the historic district review.
And we have brought that to the city attorney as an option. He did have some questions in reviewing the conservation districts that are in Detroit, because I think that's the example that Pam had originally sent us. They also seem very form-based code-like, right? So a lot of the things that are in the code, with the exception of height, are in place right now. And so we have to kind of think about that. They were also used, I believe, in more residential areas was their application. But yes, it is something that we could certainly explore. Things get a little murky. It's one of the reasons why we don't put materials, that I won't put materials in a zoning code, is that, a zoning code is regulated and enforced by set bodies according to the state, right? The Plan Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals. So those are the bodies that you would go to if you need permission to deviate from something that's in the code. And so when you start to get into style, like materials, depending on, how the conservation districts are worded, I think you run the risk. I'm not going to say that would always be the case, but I think you run the risk of having one of your zoning boards be kind of out of their element in reviewing something. And, the state also provides set standards on what you're supposed to review when you review variances. or, you know, special use permits. And so, you know, sometimes those, we'd have to be very thoughtful about how those interface and, you know, who is the review body and how that works. Because it starts to blur the line between historic district light, which, you know, is historic district commission, and zoning code, which starts to be zoning board of appeals. That's not, it's not going to work. It's, these are things that we need to think about because there's layers there.
I think, and I haven't read the conservation district for about a month, but I think the conservation district calls for the review body to be the historic district commission.
Okay.
So that would, that might be something speaking against it, just because of the knee-jerk reaction that a lot of people in town have to the historic district commission.
Yeah.
That's only true in some cases, Sharon. As I have done some additional research, I'm finding that in some cases, yes, the local district commission does review the cases, but in other cases, the planning commission reviews it.
Well, ours, I'm pretty sure ours says historic district commission.
It could be.
Yep.
It could be, but that's what amendments are for, if it ever got to that.
Mm-hmm.
May I?
Pam.
I would like to ask Christina a question that I probably should have asked as a member of the working group and never did. Was our new code meant to be aspirational or contextual? Because, you know, let me tell you why I asked. Because as I was walking around downtown and looking at tall buildings and short buildings and the average heights of buildings, as part of that process, one of the things that I noted that was, at least in the core area, fewer than 10% of our buildings were tall, meaning they exceeded more than, say, 6 stories in height. So if we had a contextual based code, why would we then have unlimited height? If we had an aspirational code, then I understand that. So,
I mean, the answer is that zoning always has to be both, right? You know, you always need to keep a weathered eye on what exists today and how the code would impact what exists today. And the zoning code is also meant to think about what would happen over the life of the code. So it's a little bit of both is the answer.
okay. May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
You may.
Given what I know our experience was when we, meaning the Preservation Commission and I as a volunteer, were working on a local district designation of the Bronson Park National Register Historic District, and the unfortunate misinformation that was spread that I think led to the denial of furthering that process, and not knowing really today, even though we've just lost another building in the district, what the tenor of the property owners is there, as well as knowing, and I think it's pretty well established in the study that I shared with you, that this area has a very different character than our core, 1 block away. I would like for us, you and the city, to focus on making an amendment to the existing code that designates this area as a special character area, that does exactly the same things as the code does for all of the other places. It regulates height, and all of those other things, setback and all of those other things, many of which are already present, but recognizing it as the civic district that it is, and that it is very different, and that it is recognized as having been there in basically the form that it is now for almost a century, and amending our existing code to recognize that and treat it as such. We can always go back after we've lost a few more buildings and talk with people about a special, a local historic district. But I'm also inclined to think that there probably are some other property owners within the boundaries of the National Registry District that might be interested in individual designations. As a consultant with a number of years of experience, I'm certain that every building in that district qualifies for an individual designation.
Oh, yeah.
And perhaps that is what we should be aiming for now, knowing that we have a code amendment in place that will kind of hold things in shape while we move forward with that approach.
And that's actually what I was going to say too, is I'm real hesitant at this point in time right now to take another stab at a local district around the park. I'm just not comfortable with that, but I think there would be much better success because Pam, I absolutely agree with you. Each and every one of those entities right now, just back of the envelope math, I am relatively certain would qualify for an individual designation. And maybe that's the route that we end up going. If you would like to be designated, we're happy to do the study and the report for you and the legwork and do it that way. I think that's going to be the more productive route to go, is to work with individual property owners that way. But Christina, is it possible, to make an amendment to the existing code right now for this region that we're discussing?
So there's a couple pieces, right?
Yeah.
So I think what Pam is suggesting is one of two things. And one is it's either creating a fourth downtown district that just covers that area, which that's one part of it, or create a some conservation district layer over downtown too. Neither of those two things exist, right? There's not a fourth district, there's not a conservation layer with the right standards, so things would have to be written. And so it's certainly not a fast process.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned earlier the balance between number of districts, having a code that's simple, not having too many if-then statements. This is the burden of writing the code, right? Do you have one giant district, but you say a lot of if-then statements that then everyone has to read through and it gets confusing? Do you divide everything into multiple districts that, are very narrowly focused? And then that becomes confusing. So there's always this balance. I would much rather understand, before we took any action on a conservation district or adding a fourth district, I would like to be armed with that information about, shadow and sun angle. That could be a simple text amendment to the code, which would be a little easier than creating districts. And I think would, cover the primary issue if, depending on what that comes out with. But right, and I think, amending the zoning code, whether it is tweaking standards or thinking about the conservation district or a fourth district, is always, amending the zoning code is always an option in dealing with it. I think there is definitely a balance between, we always have tools at our disposal, and some tools do things better than others. I think that the zoning code can have some benefit and can certainly support historic character, historic standards, a historic district. But it is not a tool. It is not always it doesn't replace, what a historic district can do. And so there's a balance there. Yeah.
If I may, Mr.
Mhm.
Chair,
Yes.
I know that special character districts can be part of a form-based code because I've seen them.
Mhm.
And I think that given the way and the good way that our form-based code is set up right now, while it would, I guess, technically, and we would need to talk about, what was included, but it would technically be a district within a district. a character area within a district that is treated differently in terms of massing, height, setback, and all of the other things that form-based code now does for us downtown. And I would be happy to go back and find some of those and share them. They didn't seem to be overly complicated. And again, it would provide a recognition that this area is special, both because of its history, but also physically form-based, very different from the rest of our downtown in any of the districts, really.
I guess I kind of agree. And again, I'm from the outside, so you know my opinion means even less. But to me, when you have a zoning area or district that's strictly protected, this district will always be protected, and it's not involving the other parts of the area. You know, you'll be able to manage it, if you will, better, you know, because then it's you can't touch, you know, District Z, or you can't do whatever to District Z, and that's inclusive of this one district. So it'd be nice if that was an option. If not, then at least look at some of the other elements that you talked about earlier.
Christina, when do you expect to have the results of the shade study and
Yeah,
studies?
So it depends on if it's a student-run project or if we seek a consultant. And so that's something I'll know within the next couple of weeks, if it's going to be able to be a student project, or if it's, you know, if we'll go another route. So I should have a better handle on that next month.
Okay.
A question, Christina. Do these need to happen over the course of a year? Because as the sun moves up and down in the sky with the seasons, the shadows change significantly.
They do. I believe architects have the ability to know the angles of the sun on the sky based on the different seasons and the time of year, how high the sun is, and are able to do it based on that, as opposed to, you know, letting a full year pass. So they have the information that would allow them to do that any time of the year.
Thank you.
Would the students have that available?
Yeah, I mean, they work very closely with their professors. If the professor did not think it was a project that they were able to do, then we would go elsewhere.
Yep.
We just have had some really lovely experiences with Andrews University. And again, you know, we're always trying to find ways to partner, you know, to build better design professionals in our community. And so if that is a possibility, it's the route that we would like to go.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess that's an important key factor for me. I guess I would like to know kind of what the timeline is that we're looking at, and I think that's a key piece of information before maybe we move any further. So for me, I would request then, when you find out, you know, within the next month, keep me posted with that information, and then maybe at the next meeting we can revisit this idea a little bit, and that would give us a better sense too of possibly how to best move forward, either temporarily or an idea of a permanent solution for this as well, maybe.
And let me say that if the professors and the students don't feel that's a project that they can take on, don't feel like they can do it in a timely manner, then, you know, again, we'll find another route that is fast, you know, that would meet our time frame.
Other questions or comments? Pam.
Has our time frame been established? What is our time frame?
Well, it depends on if we're doing it with students, because they would do it, you know, presumably over the course of their winter semester. So quarter one, you know, bleeding a bit into quarter two.
Mhm.
Okay.
Other questions, comments?
With the COVID restrictions, the students would be able to go outside and do that. Is that correct? What they'd have to be there on the ground?
So again, if the professors aren't comfortable with them doing the work, they won't. But I do know that students participating through the American Institute of Architects recently did a facade study for us along the east side neighborhood. So, I don't think that would be a restriction for this work.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
If anyone is interested in a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm sorry, Kyle.
Oh, you're fine. I just wanted to say that being a former architecture student myself, I recently watched a webinar about the program SketchUp and its new capabilities. And I'm not even sure that they would need to do a site visit in order to perform such a study, because they have so many modeling abilities based on just like GPS location.
Yeah.
And yeah, they can do building massing and all that remotely.
I was just going to say that if anybody would like a copy of this PowerPoint, I can pass it on to Sharon if it's at all useful to anybody. That link that Sharon sent out to everybody, I think on our imaginekalamazoo.com page, I think has a lot of this information. But I'm happy to share if anybody wants it.
Okay. Anything else from anyone?
Just a thank you to Christina for taking the time to join us tonight. I appreciate it very much.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
to explain it to us, so to those who don't know. So thank you.
Yeah, zoning is not an issue unless it's an issue, right? I mean, you could go your whole life and not deal with it, right? Then you want to put a deck on the back of your house, or so we've tried to be more diligent about breaking it down when we're going into neighborhoods and having these discussions, because again, it's just not something that everybody is familiar with.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Keep me.
And I will be in touch for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. And Regina and Sharon, I would like to make this an agenda item for January's meeting as well, to revisit this topic.
I'll write it down.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Christina.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving on to item 7, the financial report. Again, we have nothing to talk about with that, which is why I have something to talk about with that. This is becoming a increasingly frustrating point for me, as we still haven't had our budget meeting, and as far as I'm aware, there's still the O'Connor Fund money issue.
Transfer, yep.
That has not been transferred now, and we're over a year on that now. And these things need to be dealt with. So I don't know if you're able to push this along, Sharon, but we really need to do something with both of those points. We got to get our budget done, and we have to get that money transferred.
Yeah, I suspect that probably this late in the budget process, what Marcy has done is just submitted last year's budget all over again with no changes, which is pretty much what we've done for the past 4 or 5 years. So
it is, but
we still want to do it officially. It's part of us to say that too.
Right, absolutely. And I guess that's frustrating too, because it's not the end of the world at one level if that's what's been done, but this body has a right to vote on how that is handled and how that is done too. So yeah. Any questions? Well, I'm not even going to ask for questions because I can't help with that. But any comments on item 7? Pam?
I don't even know if these figures are accurate. I mean,
I
have they just been repeated over and over and over again every month?
That's pretty much the same thing that we saw, I think in July was the last time I had an update.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
then would it not be more legitimate to list no report than the figures than continually reporting the same figures when we don't even know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the reserve fund is not changed, but the rest of it, I don't know.
I still don't even know the difference between the balance and the reserve fund, but
Well, it won't be soon if we get the money transferred, so.
Yeah.
but what is the reserve fund? I don't understand. And how does that differ from the balance?
No idea.
See?
Yep.
Oh, boy.
This is why I only handle my own personal finances.
Well, this is why it's really pressing that this contact happens because we have no clue what we have.
And I think that just process wise, we are supposed to approve our budget
Yes.
before it goes into the full city budget. Even
Yeah.
though we're self-funded, even though it's our own money, it has no impact on the city budget in any way. We are supposed to approve that before it gets incorporated into the city budget.
Yeah. Hey, Jack. You're muted.
Done.
There you go. How's it going, Jack?
Well, I'm ready to listen.
Awesome. So getting back to it, yeah. The way that we've done it in the past since I've been in this position is we've had the budget meeting. The budget proposal has come back to the commission. The commission has voted on it, and then the final approved budget has then gone to the city, and we still haven't done steps 1 and 2 at this point in time.
And it's December 8th?
December 9th.
9th.
Yep. And this was supposed to be done sometime in July or August. And I realize that there's the delay because of COVID, but this is a bit much at this point.
Well, and I think too, it's been like, this is probably the worst it's been, but it's been increasingly difficult to get answers on things in the past few years. Like I've noticed a shift since, like, it was okay at the beginning. It was still hard, but like we could get her in a room. And then each year since, I think, has been progressively harder to get done what we need to.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't really have too much more to say on that other than we've got to have some forward movement on it. So, all right, moving on to action items. The survey, Sharon.
I have renewed a contact with the Kalamazoo Public Schools because some of their AP classes and social studies classes at the high school level may be interested in participating. All the students at the high school level are required to do some community service, and this might very well fall into that classification. We had one student that actually he was at the recruiting meeting last winter, and he actually completed his part of the survey. So I've got a meeting set up with them for next week with the public schools. And then I have a meeting set up with Amanda Cockcroft, who is our online sign up and organizational whiz. And we're going to got a meeting with her tomorrow. And we're going to talk about rolling out recruiting in the neighborhoods that are producing their new master plans. Each neighborhood is producing a master plan. So Vine has done theirs, Edison has done theirs, Northside has done theirs. Eastside, I think, is still in the process, or theirs might be done. But West Douglas, Southwest, or West Inch Hill, Southside, Westwood, and West Douglas and Stewart are in the process of working on their neighborhood plans. And so we are going to kind of work in conjunction with the neighborhood planner to get people out in the field in their own neighborhoods to survey their own neighborhoods as part of their becoming familiar with their own neighborhoods and part of their planning process. So it's kind of a two birds with one stone sort of thing. We'll get more people out in the field doing that sort of work for us, but they will also be able to contribute more effectively to their new neighborhood plan. So that's a really good thing. And I'm still hoping that we're going to launch again. I'm going to set up a webinar with either Neil or Amanda so that we can show people the same sort of orientation that we did when we were recruiting people in the first place. And I'm hoping Amanda can set up for me an online sign up so that people can find the area they want to work in and sign up for it and commit to a date to complete it by. So a lot of this is just technical details, trying to figure out what we can do online to make it easy for people, because we can't meet in person and still make progress on getting the survey done.
Okay.
So,
and I actually had one question on the digital forms for the survey. Has the section for condition been updated?
Not in condition, integrity.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It was integrity. Yeah.
Yes, it has been. Yes, it's been added and it looks good. We didn't lose any of the stuff we'd already put in. I'll still need to go back through and grade integrity, and that's still going to be not going to be a fieldwork decision that our volunteer surveyors will make.
Right.
We will make that decision seated and looking at the buildings ourselves. But that has been added, and so I have to go back and redo the ones that have already been done. But it's there's some work to be done, but it's the sort of thing I can do while I watch Citizen Kane tonight.
Okay, good. Anything else?
That's pretty much it for the survey.
Okay. Regina, the public education program. I know you have listed here, but no change. But any update?
I've emailed back and forth with Phyllis. She's on trying to get the videos for me. I've emailed Keith at KPL just to let him know where we're at. So that's where we're at.
Okay. Pam and Sharon. How?
Pam, go ahead.
We have release dates from Public Media Network for the next 3 episodes of what's called What Style of It? How Reports, as opposed to shorts, which were the first 3. Those release dates are January 9th for Greek Revival, February 6th for Gothic Revival, and March 6th for Italianate.
Cool.
Those episodes have all been reviewed and edited and got some praise from the OHAW committee yesterday, and they will thus be released beginning after the first of the year. The following Saturdays of each of these releases, they will also be then released on the Kalamazoo Public Library's KPL TV site. So that's that. We will have basically 2 releases. We worked a little bit on Monday when we met about promotion, and we're going to work with the neighborhood organizations. We have a pretty good list of neighborhood organizations now. They did receive a link to the last release and general information about where to find the episodes. I had one response from one of the neighborhood organizations on that. And we're talking about starting soon to start actually measuring views and who's shared and who's commented and those kinds of things, so we can see whether or not all of this great volunteer time and professional effort is actually doing what we hoped it will.
Okay, excellent. Anything else? No? Okay. Thank you. The traits program, no update, Sharon?
This is kind of technical, but I just had contact from Jim Turner, who is a longtime preservationist from the Detroit area and is currently sitting on the ACHP, the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation in Washington. And he sent me a set of apprenticeship standards that they set up in Puerto Rico. And this is not all that remarkable, except for the fact that they have the codes we need for how the apprenticeship ties into the standardized building trade programs nationwide. So this is like a little key to a lock that may maybe be able to get us moving some stuff forward on that in terms of making a formal program, whether it's apprenticeship or whether it ends up being an academic program. So if someone else has already done it once and gone through that trouble, then it makes it a lot easier to build on what they've done.
Yep, don't reinvent what's already been done. Well, good deal. The cemetery project.
No news on that, except that we have the final grant submission to the Irving Gilmore Foundation has been submitted. I don't know what the final amount is, but we did get all the details together. We're working closely with B'nai Israel to be sure that, because they're the ones who control the Jewish cemetery at Mountain Home. And I found out the history of it was that they bought the additional land from the people who developed Mountain Home in the within about 10-15 years after the cemetery was originally established. And so they've had sort of a kind of a cooperative agreement was what it started out being. So we are going to try to include the Jewish cemetery in that as well, to make sure that while we've already got the equipment there and we're working on roads and we're working on drainage vaults, that we can take care of what has an impact on that portion of the cemetery as well. So that's been a very positive connection.
Good.
Question? I asked, I think last month, about the marker in the Jewish portion of the cemetery. And is that a potential, can we get some work done as a result of this grant on that marker?
That was not mentioned as part of the grant proposal because they were so deep into it already. But my feeling that I get from this is this will not be the first ask. This will not be the last ask, excuse me. This is probably going to be the first in a series of projects we hope that will impact the cemetery. Once we get the first one done, I don't know whether it'll go on to more direct fundraising or whether we'll stay with the foundations. I don't know. But I think if we get one good successful project under our belts, it's going to open the road for getting a lot of other things done in the cemetery and possibly in Riverside as well.
Who, may I ask who the applicant is formally?
Oh, it's the city. It's the Public Works Department. Yep, and we have a new grants person at City Hall. Finally, yay! We haven't had someone for what, 15 years, 12 years, a long time. So we've got a very, very dogged grants person who is, really good at including everybody who wants to be part of the process and taking information from people, and it's just been a very gratifying experience. So,
okay. Designations and sites, Pam.
I thought I sent the last version, the last revision of the updated First Baptist Church local district designation to Sharon today. And then I got an email from one of the church members who is more or less the, not self-appointed, but appointed historian for the school who started, or for the church, who was looking at it, and he found a typo, which is an important typo, and a couple of other things. So Sharon, there may be a few other small things, and I told him that that was okay. Let me know. He's going to continue to read and review. But I also wanted to say that in kind of along with the conversation that we had earlier, where I voiced my opinion about more or additional local designations within the existing Bronson Park district. I would like to offer right now to write those for any property owners that are there. I think it would be a good idea to focus on the nonprofits. And I'm going to make a bold recommendation here. Let's start with City Hall.
Yes.
That's one vote of confidence.
Yeah.
It would be a great follow-up to First Baptist Church. It would set a precedent and an example that local designation is not to be feared, but to be appreciated and used. And I think it could be a big step forward. And frankly, I would love to dig into that one. That would be a really good one to do. And so there's also something that another part of that I would like to wait until we get to the O'Connor Fund discussion later in the meeting to talk about. But I think that City Hall would be a great place to start. I do think that it would be a good idea for us to eventually, us meaning me and you all, to start reaching out to the individual congregations and inviting them to have conversations about local designation and what it really means, not just what has been proclaimed in the past, which was not all true.
Mhm.
And perhaps the new demolition, the fresh demolition, will help move them forward, and perhaps the faith that First Baptist has had in moving forward would also help that conversation. So the question is, where do we go? Do you agree that City Hall is a good place to start? And then where do we go from there?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. As I said earlier, I think this is the better route to go, at least at this point in time, because there were a number of property owners around that area that did support the idea. And rather than try to reopen the door for a district, let's reach out to property owners and work with individuals, start that way. I think it's absolutely a good idea. And as an organization or an institution of the city, let's start with the city. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I would also like to look at if the tax credit passes, and I'm crossing my fingers and my toes, I could see at least one private property owner there. The Ryan Reedy's ownership of the Prang building and the Austin Sill House might very well be enough to draw him into considering the LHD too, the local district. So, I mean, if we could have both private property owners and public property owners involved, that would kind of wipe away the whole, too controlling sort of feeling that people have about the Historic District Commission.
Yeah.
For everyone's information, the new legislation that is being proposed does not require being in a local district to participate. That was one of the criteria that was removed from the former bill. So just being in a National Register district, if you can meet the requirements, can qualify you as an applicant. But still, it would be great to have the Prang building and the Austin Sill House, whose I was surprised and sad to see the actual brick dust leaking out through a hole in the paint of the front facade of that building when I walked by a couple of weeks ago. So if we're going to ask the city to engage in a local historic district study for its building, for our building, right? We all own it, don't we? Don't we? We do, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Where do we start with that?
So this is an interesting question. Where do we start according to the Department of the Interior and the National Park Service, or where do we start as this organization in Kalamazoo?
Or where do we start? Where do we start according to PA 169, which basically lays out how you make a local historic district?
I mean, we start researching, we start doing the study. Building off of what happened last time, maybe we want to reach out to the city first.
I thought that might be a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do the study without anybody giving us permission,
Yeah.
But I think that our best effort our most productive outcome would probably be if we start with discussions about the process. At the very least, it's going to give us a wonderful opportunity to educate everyone in the city administration and the commission about what the process actually is.
Yes.
And is not, step by step. We could put reports in. There's a weekly email that all the commissioners get. We could have reports on progress in that. We could have, we could just have them in on the whole process. I think that would be a wonderful idea. We might start with either a letter or asking to be on the agenda for a commission meeting to make the proposal to the commission as a whole. At a meeting sometime this spring, maybe Preservation Month.
That would be good. I think that would be a good idea.
So
how about an introductory letter with a request for a presentation at a meeting?
Yes. Yes.
Is that the best way to go, do you think, Jack?
Yes. Start early so that it's in the proper hands of the people who organize the agenda. You want to be sure you copy Scott Borling on whatever you send out, but he won't be the decider. He's the one that just tracks things.
Okay.
Yeah, the sooner the better to just say you're asking for this, and that way it doesn't stress anybody at the last minute, because stressing on some people on historic stuff hasn't worked very well.
Could we count on your support, Commissioner Urban?
Oh yeah.
Great.
Oh yeah, I've got a blueprint hanging on my wall of the building that I managed to. My son managed to salvage from the basement of City Hall.
That's great.
So yeah, I'm on board.
Okay, good to know. I would be happy to make a first draft of that letter.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. That'd be great.
Okay, I'll have it ready for next month.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, thank you. Sustainability, I don't have anything new. Sharon, do you have anything new?
No, I do not.
And operations, well, you all read my email. My next meeting with Christina is going to be after the holiday. It ended up not being this month. So yeah, so I really don't have anything that isn't going to be talked about in the future. So moving on to old and new business. Item A, the diversity and inclusion. Sharon has had a couple of conversations with people, and I'm going to hand it over to her in a second on this, but I've had a couple of conversations with different groups since our last meeting that have raised some questions for me about this regarding our role. And, this occurred to me kind of at the end of last month's meeting also, when I was talking about the idea of, this organization we can't be advocates, but rather our role is education. And I was thinking about that with the diversity and inclusion and, how far we could actually go with that project within the kind of confines or construct of what we are as an organization. And Sharon had some meetings with people this last month too that raised some of those same ideas. And so we need to, at one level, kind of think about our role within this, but also this is going to table some things for a little bit. Should we be a leader in this project, or should we be a partner with somebody who's better suited to take on the overall idea of the project? But I'm actually going to hand it over to Sharon, who can talk about this a little bit more from the meetings that she's had.
Right. So I have been, I was contacted by Dorla Bonner, who is the City of Kalamazoo Diversity and Inclusion Director. And we worked together in the department back when we were all in an unflooded building. And she said, is there something that the HPC wants to do to help with diversity and inclusion? And I said, well, funny you should ask, because we have all these ideas of something we would like to do to be part of it. And so I did a little bit more research into what the Truth, Racial Healing and Transformation group is doing over at the Community Foundation. And part of their project is, I attached it, it's the Narrative Change Design Team draft from last February. And the sort of work that they're doing, they want to have a narrative landscape. Their idea is similar to ours, and that is having the landscape speak to us, speak to people in the city about what has been, what is there in an unblinking way about our history in Kalamazoo. And so she would like very much to be like Christina was today at our January meeting and talk to us about that. She and I are meeting tomorrow. Yes, we have another Zoom meeting tomorrow to talk about things. And so I think that I much as we were all very enthusiastic, everybody was very enthusiastic about this, and people wanted to get their assignments. I'm going to go and talk to this person. I'm going to go talk to that person, and that kind of thing. But I think we need to be part of the movement that is already underway in at least 2 locations around town that I'm very aware of, and maybe more, so that we can support that with our expertise in historic research and historic preservation, and possibly some of our funding that we have that we could spend money to maybe help with the cost of markers or whatever it is, wherever this goes. I don't think the HPC as a group should be the group to take the lead on this when we have people who are already running with this. They are pulling the wagon, and they are being paid by the community foundation and other foundations to do it, whereas we're entirely a volunteer staff. And while we're very enthusiastic, I don't think we could do anywhere near as complete a job as some of the professionals that have already engaged in this and are already moving forward with it. I think I would just like to join that wagon train and make sure that we can be part of it as a commission.
Yeah, and I agree, because I don't want to step on the toes of anybody who already has a project framework or a project like this under the way. TRHT, not only are they doing it, but they're better suited to do it in a broader capacity than our mission allows us.
Mm-hmm.
And within the structure that we have as an organization, we could deal with a few topics related to this. It makes more sense if TRHT and the city have a much broader plan and we end up being an arm of this, I think, is my opinion. So what I would ask is, I got emails from a handful of you. Hang on to those ideas of what groups you would like to work with and contact, etc. Because, in no way, shape, or form would we be abandoning this. But I think ideally, and we'll see what happens, but Dorla will be at our meeting next week or next month, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth. But I think if there's an organization that's already steering this and we could be a part of it, we could have a very specific mission on what we're going to focus on, and then take the ideas that we've already created and build on those within the framework that already exists. So I guess I would ask you to kind of hang on to your ideas for now, and we'll continue this at the next meeting. Does that sound, I mean, we'll open it up to comments too, but what do you all think about that?
I think it's a good idea. I think when we talked about it, if I recall at the last meeting, we were not aware of other programs that were reaching out. And so we were kind of grabbing at straws.
Yep.
But certainly I agree, we should not step on their toes. They're going to be a little bit more in depth. However, I think we should pass on some of the questions or ideas that we want for them to ask for us. But I agree, and the other thing is, these are professionals, at the end of the day, they don't want to be inundated with a different phone call from a different person at a different time. So if they can do it one at a time, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I'm sorry, Pam. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Kate.
I think that that's a great idea. I do still want to very much offer our hands as helpers with this, and not just say, okay, they've got it.
Mm-hmm.
Because as we know, this takes a lot of work. And so if we can be, some of the people that help move it along, absolutely. I just don't want to help someone else that has it. We're good. But I agree that they should take the lead.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm suggesting at all, is to just, all right, cool, we're good, but I think if we can focus on, the larger idea of inclusivity is out there, and organization X, whoever organization X is, they're spearheading this. If we can be a partner in that, we can absolutely focus on the preservation aspect, the history aspect, et cetera, focus on our wheelhouse. I think it'll end up being a much more meaningful and inclusivity project.
Yeah,
So,
I totally agree.
yeah. Pam, you had your hand up. Yeah.
One of the things I think that we can actively do as a commission and as the official local historic district study committee and the group that looks at first drafts of National Register nominations is to make sure that inclusivity is there in the research and writing of those nominations, and to reach out to these partners, a number of them, and ask for review and feedback.
Yeah.
In the process. If I recall correctly, the TRHT was funded by the Kellogg Foundation. Is that right?
I believe so.
Right.
Yes.
I'm wondering if precisely for that reason, if they might not also be a candidate for the National Trust's African American Heritage Fund for at least the African American part of that work. That fund was created a number of years ago, in part because the advisors, of which I am one for the National Trust, took forward a decade ago the idea of inclusiveness and diversity in our work. And it gave out millions of dollars of grants just recently. I think there are either 1 or 2 cycles per year. And I think that information should be shared with the TRHT to let them know that this other potential funding mechanism exists for the work it's doing. And that since, if we're going to collaborate, we ought to do it on all levels, right? They might want to look into that. Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Question. Sharon, so you have a grant person now. Is there a role to look for things? Because certainly I'm sure there are other grants out there, just not for the African American, but for other.
Sure. Her role is to do both, to do research, to be familiar with grants and where sources might be, and then to assist in the creation of the grant applications. And actually she just ran with the one for the Gilmore Foundation. So yeah, her basic job is to be the interface between the city and the granting organizations and the people that need the money to try to make it all work together. And sometimes it won't be the city applying for the grant, but she might be able to say, well, this might be a great source for this project. So she's supposed to be kind of a resource person as well as a grant writer.
Can we work with her to either A, have her research some, or B, if we provide her with areas that could potentially have grant funding, she could help us with getting some of that?
I think we'd have to refine our interest area a little bit before she would go and look, before she would do that. Being just marginally familiar with grants. There are lots and lots and lots of grants out there, and some are really deep pocketed ones, and other ones are like, we'll give you $1,000 to do something. And so you kind of want to have an idea of whether you're focused closely enough, whether this grant's going to fit. There's a grant that's just been extended, the deadline for the civil rights grants through the National Park Service, I think. That's just been extended. So, there's that kind of thing. So I think we need to kind of refine what we were looking for a little bit first. And I don't think that will happen until we have begun meeting with some of the other organizations, because I do know that one of the rules of thumb of grants is do not let a grant dictate your program. Your program should dictate which grant you go for.
Absolutely.
So,
and I feel like too, the more partners, this is the case with museum grants, the more partners you have and are able to pull in and say that you're facilitating,
Right.
you're actually giving advantages and opportunities to 3 organizations, not just one. And look at all the stuff that, that is just something that will add that much. And I think it too, for us in general, we need a more holistic approach. I know what we want to do and I can see it, but stepping on toes and creating a competing something. We all want to do the same thing, but we just have to talk to each other first so that we know that we're doing it well. And
the other problem is too, though, we don't know what the end outcome is going to be. And with whatever grant we apply for, we have to be able to tell what it's going to do, and nobody can answer that question right now.
Right. There's just so many possibilities of where we could go with this that I think we need to be a little bit more focused before we start looking for grants. But I'm 100%, let's get the money to help us where we can,
It's just going to take time. At the end of the day, it's just going to take some time, and I think we're getting there. And we'll revisit this next month as well when Dorla joins us, and we'll get it locked down. We'll get it locked down, I think.
So in the interim, what is the best way to get the information about the African American Cultural Heritage Fund to the folks at the foundation that are working on TRHT?
I would just email them directly to the TRHT. They've got an inbox.
Yeah.
On the community foundation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing that, Pam.
Fred, you look very comfortable.
I'll stretch my back a little bit more this way.
Good.
Okay.
I'll say too, Josh, you skipped F, but I didn't say anything about it because it was mine. And all I was going to do is say that for Preservation Month, I think that we'll talk about that more with the work plan, which is your next thing on old and new business.
Thank you for letting me know that I skipped F. And really the only thing that I have for the work plan is remember that we're having a session on February 24th at 6 p.m. to go over the work plan. So you reminded me about a reminder, and thank you. C, O'Connor Fund grant opportunities. Pam.
Yes, where are my notes? I've been thinking about ways, in addition to hopefully perhaps making a contribution to the TRHT effort or whatever that turns out to be. There are some other things that I think I'd like to at least start a conversation with perhaps a subcommittee about how some additional grants might be considered. One of them is to consider making perhaps a test grant to a local organization that works with low-income resident homeowners on appropriate repairs to their homes. There are several, I know KNHS does it, Habitat does it, Community Homeworks does it, although I understand from their website they have a backlog right now.
Of money or projects or?
Money and projects. One of the reasons they're not doing their emergency repair program right now is because I think their projects are backlogged because of COVID. But it also could be a funding. I haven't asked, I'm not sure. I could check with Chris, but I don't think we're at that point of the conversation yet. Perhaps a one-year grant to one or more of those organizations to help low-income homeowners that need repairs to the exteriors of their homes. I'm thinking windows, roofs, those kinds of things, that would help them stay in their homes. And I hadn't thought a lot about it any more than that, except that the Secretary of Interior standards would be used to guide the work. And that whomever is doing the work would have to be trained in that, or at least have some knowledge. Beyond that, that's as far as I've gotten, but I'd like to engage with, if a couple of the members of the Preservation Commission are interested, I'd like to have conversations with one or two of you who might be interested about how that might look if we were to do it. The other one that I thought of, because I'm heartbroken about the loss of the First Reformed Church building, is that perhaps those, to begin with, churches and perhaps later other nonprofits might be given access to a pool of funds for maintenance for the exteriors of their buildings for a time definite period that would be related to the local designation of their property. So in other words, a carrot to go with the designation.
Yeah.
I know, having looked at all of those buildings in the Bronson Park district, I can tell you that almost all of them, 90%, 85 or 90% of them have made major investments in their properties in the last decade or two. And that, having belonged to one of those churches for a long time, I know that there's never more money to spend than they need, right? Something always needs to happen. And perhaps that could be a program that could, as I said, be offered for a time certain period once designation takes place, or if a property is already designated. For example, First Baptist. They are trying to raise funds right now and will continue to try to raise funds over a period of time. And that kind of help is not always the kind of help that they can get from other potential grantors.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, could we form a subcommittee? And who wants to join me in the conversation?
Yeah, we absolutely can form a committee. I would be happy to be part of it.
I've got a couple of quick comments. First of all, I know that Allen Chapel AME is desperately looking for money to help with their roof. And they would probably they're already very interested in a National Register nomination. And I'd be willing to bet that they would be very comfortable making that trade-off to try to become a local historic district. And since they're right across the street from Stewart, that's kind of a natural fit. Their building tells the story of almost of the racial history of Kalamazoo between the blacks and the whites, because they started in 1855 as the oldest black congregation. They built their own church down near where Mackenzie's is today in like 1910, 1913. And then as their congregation grew and the white flight started taking place, they bought the building that they are in now in 1980.
Yeah.
And so their congregation tells the story of, it's the racial history of Kalamazoo. They'd probably be very happy if they could get some help. I have no idea what their roof is going to cost, but I know that that's one of the reasons they're pursuing the National Register nomination, in the hope that we'll add something to their eligibility for possibly getting a grant to help with the roof. And it's hard for religious institutions to get grants. The Sacred Spaces, the National Trust, they usually have over 300 applications for each grant round, and they don't give more than 12 grants out.
Yep.
So it's there just isn't money for churches unless they can raise it themselves. And right now that congregation is not that big. It's under 100 people.
Yeah.
My initial thought about this proposal was to work first with the churches around the Park District, because that's where our greatest loss is right now. And this would be an effort to stem the loss and encourage protection for the future. But I'm certainly not, I'm not limiting anything right now until we start having some discussions.
And when I worked with the Vine Ventures organization years ago, when we had money before we gave it away to the Vine neighborhood, we used to do matching grants for homeowners. We would give up to $6,000 for a roof, and we would match money for smaller projects for homeowners. They had to be low income. They had to, need it, but it was, and at that time it was limited to Vine, not just the historic district. So there have been programs that have been created for the small level grant stuff too. So that we could use that same type of, material and documentation that we used before. And I love the idea of partnering either with Habitat or Community Homeworks or KNHS just to find people that might be interested in applying that just need a little bit of help with something.
Yeah.
Those are the people I really like to help. Not the ones that need an entire rebuild of their house or have a completely failing foundation, but the people who need their front steps rebuilt or the rails rebuilt properly, or something that'll really have an impact on the street and on their comfort and living in the home.
Right, a set of storm windows.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think too, Pam, that it reminds me of one that we've talked about a few times, the paint program that I know took advantage of early on. It's a little bit more than that, of course, than just the paint program. But I think that those things are important because we can't necessarily help with the catastrophic, but we can help with the pre-catastrophic. We want to help those not get to that point.
Right.
Yeah. So, I'd talk about it with you more.
Yeah.
Good.
Me too.
Yep. And senior services already identifies a lot of people. They had to give up on their painting program because they used kids from the Douglas Community Association. And because if you're under 18, you're classified as a child, you can't handle or be around lead paint. So they had to completely give up that program that was CDBG funded. So there is a gap there for helping people paint their houses too.
Yep.
So does senior services still do the program at all, or do they?
They don't do paint. They just do all sorts of other things. They, they do interior and exterior repairs. They build ramps. They rebuild front steps. All sorts of different things.
Yeah, but not paint anymore though.
No.
Okay. So they should be on the list as one of the possible organizations.
Yeah, one of the possible partners. Yeah.
Okay. So I have Josh, Catherine, and Regina. Anyone else? Let's not make this a full commission meeting. That's too hard to manage.
Well,
it's against the rules.
It has to be sub quorum. So you've got your three, and I'll be happy to be in on that too.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
You just want to send out an email then, Pam?
Yep.
All right. Sounds great. Okay. Approval of meeting notes from last month.
Any changes or what I do with them?
I didn't see anything. I was going to say I enjoyed your note about the initial, because I know that's from my notes. I change everybody's to first and last initials so that I can go faster through my notes. So.
Yep, I said that's it. I'm going to do the same. These are not formal minutes, so I think that'll make it easier. It's a lot faster.
I didn't see anything.
Okay, so.
Anybody else? Okay. Motion to approve minutes or notes.
I'll motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Coordinator report. Sharon.
Let me pull it up so I remember what I said. There has not been an awful lot happening other than the demolition. I went down and took pictures yesterday just because I felt like it. HDC is way down, but that's not a surprise at all. Although I am getting some very serious interest from people who want to get started early on planning their spring projects. So I think that bodes well for 2021 in terms of getting stuff done. So yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. Other than telling everybody that I am probably retiring at the end of June this coming year. And we will probably be starting a search for someone to replace me in late March with the idea that there'll be some level of overlap as yet undetermined between me being on the job and the new person taking over so that they can get some training. And then they will be part of, I think the single most useful experience that I had before I started as the preservation coordinator was doing the survey. So I really want to get someone on board to be part of the survey and familiarize themselves with the city. I don't know if we'll get a local Kalamazoo person, But if we don't, we're going to definitely familiarizing them with the city is going to be a big part of that project. So.
Okay.
Will you still be a member of the OHA committee after you retire, Sharon?
Yeah, you're going to have to drag me away kicking and screaming. Okay.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I want to do that and wind down the old house network somehow, figure out what's going to happen there now that we actually have some money. It's like, I don't know, we're just going to, a lot of decisions to be made, but nothing needs to be done before the end of the year or even before spring, a lot of it. So.
I have a nice place where you can make a deposit. It's called the O'Connor Fund. Oh, well, I never stop promoting it.
Okay. Citizen comments on non-agenda items.
There were no citizen comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, commissioner comments.
No comments.
Okay. Motion to or move to adjourn the meeting? Anyone?
I move to adjourn.
Meeting adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Happy
everybody.
holidays.
Have
Happy
a great
holidays.
holiday. Yes. And we'll see you in January.
Yes. Yes.
Bye.
All right. Be well, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.